Hello, hello, my friends. AmyR here with Prairie Paper and Ink. Welcome back to my face in my card making space. And large florals, for most of you, are you surprised? If you're new here, welcome. I'm AmyR. I love large floral stamps. Can never have enough, really. So this is the Floral Trims stamp set by Tim Holtz. This came out a year or two ago. I forget when it came out, and I immediately ordered it, and then it's been sitting here. So pulled it out, inked it up, used both of them, made a couple cards, and I did a thing that I've done many times in many videos over the years, and that's to like kind of make a rainbow of colors using only 3. And I generally have a go-to of 3 colors that I use, but this time I mixed it up a bit. And this time I used Salvaged Patina, Squeeze Lemonade, and Kitsch Flamingo. And I used Distress Spray stains. I did it to create like an inky splotchy background, and I also painted with them. It's fun. You can do all sorts of things with sprays. So I did, mixed media, use one of the newer stencils. I'll get into all of that. As always, I will have a list, a supply list, and links to everything I used in the description box below the video. If you just expand that, it all pops up for you. All of my links are affiliate links. That just means that if you click on one of my links and end up placing an order, I get a little kickback at no extra cost to you. That's what helps pay the bills, fund the heating and the lighting, all the things. And then, keep watching. I'll show you guys how I made these cards. Alrighty. I had so much fun making these. So, starting off with Distress White Heavystock. You can also use watercolor paper for this. Distress watercolor paper works amazing. Regular watercolor paper, just something that can handle water. And then I'm using those 3 sprays. You can do this with distress inks. You can use distress oxide inks. You can use distress oxide sprays. All those products that I just mentioned all will work very similarly, especially when doing ink smushing. And then the other thing to always remember is surface matters. I'm using one of my non-stick craft mats, also from Tim Holtz, because ink beads up on this, even though I am using sprays. Same thing though. If I was working on my glass work surface and I just sprayed onto the glass, it pools. And you don't get that fun like beading of the inks. And this applies whether you're using sprays, inks, etc. So I highly recommend having one of these craft mats. They're also nice just, when you really want to get inky and messy, keeps things a little more contained. So I just sprayed the spray as I was showing there. I'm also spraying a bit of water. When working with the distress spray stains, you do not need to spray with water. I chose to add water just to kind of lighten the color a little bit, because these backgrounds I don't want to be super intense. That's also why I went with these colors specifically, because usually I will use picked raspberry, mustard seed, and either peacock feathers or mermaid lagoon, just depending on my mood. Those are kind of my 3 go-tos for doing like rainbows of colors, but those colors are much more intense than these. So this was me toning it down just a little bit. So I just spray, press the cardstock into it, repeat. And then I dry it with my heat tool. You could also leave off the drying and then go on to the next color. Wet on wet layers, wet on wet blends, wet on dry layers. So I was doing wet on dry just because. But you can just experiment. I've talked about this in other videos. It is really fun to just do backgrounds like this. Cut down a bunch of watercolor paper, Heavystock, whatever you've got. Pick out some inks, sprays, whatever you got, and just play, because it's every single time, even doing these same colors, same cardstock, same everything, they end up looking completely different. So when they were done, I run them through my Minc machine. You can also use a laminator if you have more patience and more time. You can just leave them out, put them under a stack of books just to flatten them. These weren't super warped because I didn't add a ton of water to them, but I want to stamp directly on these, and it just helps to have them as flat as possible. So I just stick them in this is just parchment paper that I fold over, and then I run it through my Minc machine, and it just helps flatten them a little bit. And you can also put it between like a couple pieces of copy paper if you don't have like a Minc machine, a laminator, etc. You could put it between some copy paper and run it through your die cut machine with the die cut plates. You might have to add some shims, that also helps. to flatten, and I just recommend some copy paper because usually, you know, our die cut plates are all chopped up and have texture to them. So to prevent that texture from transferring to your cardstock, stick it between some copy paper, run it through that way. That also works. So now that I got them flattened out, I am going to stamp onto them. And I remembered I needed to remove, I have like that Waffle Flower grip mat, which is pretty thick. Remove that from my MISTI because the Tim Holtz stamps are red rubber on cling foam. So I'm just using one of my little Brutus Monroe sticky mats. And mine isn't very sticky anymore because I've used it a million times with watercoloring and stuff. But it does the job. So I stuck that in there. You can also just use a little fold over tape or a little bit of adhesive. I just wanted to kind of use the sticky mat to keep this in place because I had a feeling I was probably going to stamp more than once. And I was right, thankfully. I'm usually always right. I'm being sarcastic. Anyway, I am inking up one of the floral images and I'm using Black Soot Distress Archival ink. The Archival inks are permanent. They aren't going anywhere. They're not going to smear. Another option is to use I love to use VersaFine Clair Nocturne. The VersaFine Clair Nocturne does take a lot longer to dry. That's also why I went with this because this dries really quickly. And yeah, it ain't going nowhere. So I inked it up. I stamped it a couple times and then removed that panel and then using the other floral image and doing the exact same thing. So I'm going to ink it up with that Black Soot Archival ink and then stamp it, and then I'll stamp it a second time just to get it a little more intense. So, and you could honestly almost like leave it here, you know, go on, add little elements, whatever. But I wanted to paint over this just to give it that little extra something. So I'm going to use those same 3 sprays. And this is how I prefer adding them to my little palette. I refuse to even attempt to like pour out a little bit of this because me and my clumsiness, I'd end up dumping the entire bottle like all over myself and everything else. You don't need much. So I've just got a little palette here and I'm just making little puddles of the sprays. And I started with the Squeeze Lemonade and with Color Theory. And also like the easiest way to kind of think of this is like think of your printer ink. You have those 3 shades. You have magenta, cyan, and yellow. Those 3 make all the colors. So that's what I do, you know? So I've got the yellow. The main blob is going to stay yellow and then the 2 little ones. So you mix the yellow and the blue, which is Squeeze Lemonade and Salvaged Patina, makes green. This first little bit here is in real time. And then I'm just going to speed this up in editing. This honestly didn't take very long. When I say I slapped on the color, I slapped on the color. I didn't worry about it at all. It especially is more like freeing and less to stress about or anything when you've already got this like inky background that you've stamped on top of. So there's already splotches and texture and things going on. So your eye is kind of all over the place. And I find that just so freeing. So freeing. Seriously. Like when you start doing, you know, messy watercoloring and splattering and all those things, they're very intimidating. Trust me, I'm 100% aware of this because before I first got into it, I would watch other people's videos and I was like, how do you know what you're doing? How do you figure this out? And then I just started playing with it and started doing it because it was like, how do you know? Like, how do you go outside the lines and not feel like, ugh, what did you do? Once you start doing it, it's super fun. So I didn't really go outside the lines with my coloring, but I also I wasn't precise with it. I wasn't keeping it, you know, exact. I was legit just slapping color down because it's fun. You can also get even more fun with it depending on the type of like inky background you've created, is to kind of follow the colors of the background on the areas you're coloring. So that can get really fun too. I didn't do that this time. I just kind of did, you know, I did green on the leaves and then each flower I did a different color. So I mixed the yellow and the pink together to make an orange. I mixed the blue and the pink together to make a purple. So then I've got all the colors of the rainbow and I just slapped it on, you know, and it was still light. If I wanted to make these really stand out, either you can add an extra layer or you can go with the darker shades. Like if I was going to do this and I really wanted these florals to pop like heavily, I would switch to those darker colors I mentioned earlier. So picked raspberry, mustard seed, and then probably Mermaid Lagoon. Either one, Mermaid Lagoon or the other one I mentioned that now my brain stopped, peacock feathers. That would really make them pop because they're just much more intense colors. and would be really fun. But I wanted these to be just the way they were. So I did all that painting, let that dry, which didn't take very long. And then I pulled out Black Soot Distress ink this time. This is the water reactive one. And I've got my little blending tool and with my little blending foam. And I just blended on the edges of these panels. These panels, by the way, are A2 size. So 4¼ by 5.5 inches. And I just added that black ink because once I start getting in that mixed media mood, and especially when I'm working with like Tim Holtz stuff, it's like, oh, let's add the black soot, you know, let's grunge it out. This is my form of grunge, not a brown in sight. Although, you know, you could add some brown to this and it would have looked amazing. I need to do that more often. Anyway, back to this. So I did that little blending, and then the other black soot, this was like Black Soot everything. Black Soot Distress paint, one of my faves for splatter. Put these into my little splat box, put a bit of this paint on my palette, my little fan brush, splattered that onto these backgrounds with distress paint, especially the black soot. Clean it up immediately because it dries permanently. So I cleaned everything up, let that dry, and then I pulled out black opaque distress texture paste. And this little stencil, this is one of the new ones. This is from the Mini Stencil 60. Yes, Mini Stencil Set 60. And just held it in place and applied the black opaque texture paste over it. Just cause, you know, it just gives it that extra something. And this texture paste is awesome. I have made my own black texture paste in the past with like black soot paint and, you know, regular white texture paste. You need to use a lot of paint. It completely alters the texture of the paste, and it takes quite a bit of the paint to get it black. This black texture paste, oh, I'm so glad. Mine, I bought it when it came out. What was that? Last fall. I think it was supposed to be like a Halloween / like holiday release, and then we all pestered Ranger to make it part of the permanent line. So I'm pretty sure, I think now it is part of the permanent line. So I don't have press and seal on my container at this moment. I'm going to add press and seal because, yeah, I've had mine for a few months. I noticed it's starting to thicken up because pastes do not last forever. They're not meant to. Press and seal is your friend. And I do have a link to it because Simon Says Stamp does carry it and ships this, because for international people, it is very difficult to find. For those of us in North America, we can generally find it at the grocery store. Highly recommend it. One roll of this stuff is going to last you from, like, I've had this roll in my studio for years. So just cut a piece of that, press it down onto the container. That blocks it there. You can also press it down like right into the product to remove air completely. With some paste, that is probably a great thing because it will remove all air, you know, and it'll extend the life. But more often than not, I just slap it on there, close the lid, we're good. So set everything aside to dry. Off camera, I die cut white cardstock with the Just a Note wafer die from CZ Design. This one was a more recent release. This has been really popular. I think as of me doing this voiceover, it's all on pre-order because everyone rightfully bought it up because it's just one, it's Kathy Zilski. We love her. And the font choice, perfection. The stamp set I'm also going to use, perfection. There'll be links. Anyway, stacking the layers of white cardstock together as is tradition to give it dimension. Just using my little craft tacky glue. The outline I die cut from black cardstock. And then I'm going to adhere my stacked words to the black outline. And then, yeah, I'm just using my craft tacky glue that I have in Precision Glue Press. And for those that aren't aware, if you search my YouTube channel, I did a review on this glue press earlier this year. Yeah, a dedicated review. It's on there. So after I got the words, you got to do the dots to this little J, the little tittle. So stack those together. And then I did the same thing with the second one. And then for the insides of my cards, this is another thing I've shown in past videos. So this is my card base. So it's going to be a top folding A2 white note card. So sticking that into my MISTI, I've got my trusty little piece of Post-it tape that I will continue to reuse until there's nothing left of it. And then I'm going to line up my stamp in kind of the same way I have it for the card front. And then I'm going to ink this up with the same colors of distress inks. So Squeeze Lemonade, Kitsch, Flamingo, Salvaged, Patina. And this time I'm starting with yellow because I don't want my yellow ink pad to pick up any other colors because yellow just gets contaminated super easily. So I ink up the stamp with the ink pad, and then I was using a blending brush in the same color, just where the color ends. And I'm doing the same thing with the pink, so Kitsch, Flamingo, and then Salvaged Patina. Ink up the stamp, and then I use blending brushes just to soften that line between the inks so that I don't have that straight edge of the ink pad on the stamp image. And by overlapping the inks, I get a rainbow of colors with those 3 inks. So I'm going to do the exact same thing a second time with the second card base and the other stamp. Again, starting with the yellow so that I don't get other color. The other colors, like the Kitsch, Flamingo and the Salvaged Patina, they'll pick up a little bit of that yellow ink because I didn't clean the stamp off in between. I'm fine with that because they don't, it's such a small amount, and the you know, color of the Kitsch, Flamingo and the Salvaged Patina, they'll outweigh what little tiny bit of yellow ink they pick up, whereas the yellow would easily pick up those other colors. Hopefully that makes sense. So once I got everything stamped, now I got to put the grip mat back in because I'm going to stamp sentiments that are clear photopolymer stamps. So put my grip mat back in there, put the card base in, and then I'm just using one of the phrases from that Just a Note stamp set that coordinates with that wafer die set. So I'm going to line that little sentiment up. And yeah, if you're way more into like clean and simple and not the inky messy stuff, the insides of these cards would make very nice clean and simple cards. So often, I always say to you guys, like, I don't do clean and simple very often. It's just not my forte. But a lot of times the insides of my cards are the definition of a clean and simple card. So just whatever floats your boat. So inked up that stamp, stamped it onto the insides of these cards with that same black soot Archival ink. And by now my backgrounds are dry, like the paste is dry. So I pulled out some of my black and white baker's twine, wrapped that around the card front. And then I'm going to use my reverse tweezers. So I start the knot and then use the reverse tweezers, which will kind of pinch and hold it tight for me so that I can then sit and fiddle and get my little bow the way I want, which having it wrapped around this way in this orientation, it's a little bit more fiddling to get the bow to work, if that makes sense. But again, reverse tweezers for the win. Because yeah, I can sit and fiddle till I'm happy, pull it tight, remove the tweezers, pull it tight again. And then once I've got it the way that I want it, so I just carefully, move my little bow around, get the tails the way I want them to be, trim off the excess, and then I repeat that on the second one. So once I've got that in place, to adhere the die cut sentiment, I'm going to put some thin little foam squares because I've got dimension created with the twine. So I avoid putting any of the foam adhesive where the twine is. That way you can pass underneath the die cut sentiment and everything it lays a little more flush. So got those into place, pop that into place just like so. And then I repeat the exact same process for the second card front. And then the only thing to remember, and I made sure to double check, when I adhere these card fronts to the card bases, I check to make sure that I'm using the same card front that matches the stamp on the inside at the same time as at the end of the world. If I messed it up, no, but I try to remember that. Put adhesive on the back, and then I just use my magnets because my work surface is magnetic, and I picked up that tip from one of Yana Smakula's videos, is using the little magnets to hold everything down, which... love it. Genius. So held everything down with the magnets, let that adhere, repeated it on the second card. And then my last little bit of embellishment is these clear little sequins. So I just kind of sprinkled a few of these onto each of the card fronts. And then once I was kind of happy with where I placed them, I'm going to adhere these into place using my craft tacky glue and my little embellishment wand here. And then once these are adhered, these cards are complete. So I've got a rainbow of colors with only 3 colors. Got some black texture paste going on, die cut sentiment, good old CZ design. These florals are gorgeous. I'm like kicking myself for not using these sooner because they are. It's just a beautiful set. So like I said, I will have links to all the things in the description box below the video. So you just got to click on the little button to expand that and check it all out for those that are interested. I will also have a link to my blog post, and there'll be picture links to the supplies as well, and that'll be linked directly below for anyone who is interested. Thank you all so very much for taking the time to watch my videos, for thumbs upping, commenting, subscribe if you haven't. I'd love to have you, and I'll see you all very soon in the next one. Bye.